Think the Middle Ages were all about knights, castles, and chaste maidens locked away in towers. Think again. Because beneath the hymns, holy relics, and heavy chainmail, there was an entire underworld of sexuality that most history books conveniently leave out. This isn't your average medieval documentary. This is the dark, twisted, absolutely unfiltered reality of how people actually approached sex in a time when bathing was optional, virginity was currency, and church and bedroom were disturbingly intertwined. We're talking about rituals involving animal organs, church-sponsored prostitution, witnessed consummations, and contraception methods so insane, you'll wonder how anyone survived long enough to reproduce. So if you're into history that dares to go where textbooks won't, subscribe our YouTube channel and join us as we uncover the most hidden, scandalous corners of the past. We bring you stories that shock, educate, and leave you whispering. They really did that? Because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about the so-called Dark Ages. Spoiler alert, they weren't dark because of the lack of electricity. They were dark because of what people were doing, in bed. Chapter 1, The Bundling Bed. Let's kick things off with a medieval dating tradition so bizarre, so mind-bendingly awkward, that it makes modern blind dates look like a luxury spa retreat. Bundling. Imagine you're a young man in a medieval village. Your parents have found you a potential match. Great, right? You're excited, nervous, maybe hoping for some privacy to get to know your future bride. Well, tough luck. Because you're about to get tied into a sack and stuffed into bed with a complete stranger. And yes, the family is watching. Bundling was a so-called chaste courtship practice where two unmarried young people were physically wrapped together in the same bed, fully clothed, often with a literal plank of wood placed between them to prevent anything unholy. It was like a medieval straitjacket sleepover, with all the romance of a hostage situation and all the privacy of a town square. Parents didn't just approve of this practice, they encouraged it. Why? Because in their minds, proximity bred connection, and if the two didn't get physically intimate, what's the harm? Except, surprise. When you put two hormonal teens in bed together, even with a chastity board between them, things tend to escalate. To make matters more absurd, bundling bags were actually a real product. Yes, someone had to design, sew, and sell literal sex prevention sacks. Talk about a business model based entirely on denial. And if you're wondering whether it worked, it didn't. Historical records show that pregnancy rates were higher among bundling couples than those who courted more traditionally. Turns out, no amount of linen, wood, or parental supervision can stop nature from doing its thing. Even the church hated it. Priests wrote furious sermons calling bundling immoral and dangerous. But try convincing a rural village to stop doing something that was cheap, convenient, and, let's be honest, kind of exciting for the teenagers. Bundling was the medieval version of saying, you can sleep together, but don't touch each other, and expecting that to actually work. It was awkward, counterproductive, and kind of hilarious. But above all, it was one of the earliest examples of society trying to control sexuality with rules that made absolutely no sense. And that is just the beginning. Chapter 2, Aphrodisiac Feasts. If you thought food and sex were two separate things in the Middle Ages, think again. Because in medieval Europe, a dinner menu could double as a sex manual. Welcome to the world of aphrodisiac feasts, where nothing said romance like roasted animal testicles and powdered bird brains. That's not a joke. That's an appetizer. While modern lovers might pop a chocolate or pour a glass of wine, medieval nobles were going full Iron Chef, Lust Edition. The main ingredient? Testicles. Specifically from bulls, rams, or boars, chopped, fried, boiled, and even mixed into wine. They called them stones, because apparently, calling them balls was too crass for polite society. But don't worry, it gets worse. They also believed that consuming the reproductive organs of animals would increase their own virility. So naturally, recipes included things like sparrow brains, boiled wombs, and goat penises sautéed with ginger. Speaking of spices, they weren't just about flavor. Spices like cinnamon, saffron, pepper, and ginger were considered sexual superchargers. And this is exactly why spice traders were basically the medieval version of pharmaceutical reps. You weren't just buying pepper, you were buying performance. Noblemen and women would host orgy-themed banquets, yes, really, where every dish was carefully selected to stimulate the senses and the loins. Entire wedding feasts were structured around love foods, and these weren't subtle. The goal was to chemically prepare the bride and groom for maximum sexual performance later that night. Imagine going to a wedding today and being served boar testicle stew, fried pigeon brains, and honey-glazed almond cakes, all to help the couple get in the mood. Romantic, right? And this wasn't just folklore. Medieval doctors actually wrote medical treatises on aphrodisiacs, complete with detailed recipes. We're talking legit scientific texts with titles like On the Generation of Semen and Foods That Increase Lust. Yes. That was an actual bestseller in its time. These guides even warned which foods to avoid during Lent or religious fasts, not because of calories, but because they were too sexually stimulating. So next time you complain about food at a wedding, just be thankful you're not being served ram testicle tartare in the name of fertility. Because in the Middle Ages, your dinner plate was basically your bedroom prescription. Chapter 3, The Consummation Circus. If you thought meeting your in-laws was uncomfortable, wait until you hear about medieval bedding ceremonies, where the phrase, get a room, took on a whole new meaning, because everyone was invited. You see, in medieval Europe, a marriage wasn't legally valid until it was consummated, and that meant people needed proof. Actual, physical, witnessed proof. Because nothing says eternal love like having your aunt, priest, and 3 barons standing around your bed watching you do the deed. Here's how it worked. After the wedding, the bride and groom would be paraded, yes, paraded, through the halls of their estate, cheered on by friends and family. They'd be escorted to their bedchamber while guests sang songs and made encouraging jokes. It was like a sex-themed graduation ceremony, except instead of a diploma, you got pressure to perform. Then came the undressing ritual. The bride was stripped by her female relatives. The groom by his male relatives. Because gender-segregated foreplay was apparently a thing. The newlyweds were then tucked into bed while still surrounded by guests, many of whom would stay to witness the actual consummation. Not just a peek. Not just listening in. They would stay and watch, the whole time. Sometimes even offering instructions. And if that doesn't make your skin crawl, how about this? Afterwards, guests would inspect the bed sheets for blood, as physical evidence of the bride's virginity and the act itself. Yep. The couple had to present the sheets like a medieval CSI report. Because in their minds, a land deal, a dowry, or a noble alliance depended on proof that the business was done. Oh, and this wasn't just for royalty. Any marriage involving land, status, or inheritance could require a bedding ceremony. No performance. No marriage. And just in case you're thinking, surely they didn't make people redo it. Oh, they did. Court records show annulments were granted if the act wasn't properly witnessed, forcing couples to do it again, with an audience. It became such a normalized process that etiquette manuals from the time included full chapters on proper bedding ceremony behavior. Where to stand. What to say. How long to stay. Because nothing screams romance like a room full of nobles arguing over how loudly the bride should moan. In the Middle Ages, sex wasn't private. It was political theater. And consummation wasn't a sacred moment. It was a legally binding group project. Chapter 4, Sacred Breeding Schedules. In modern times, when couples want a baby, they track ovulation, read parenting blogs, and maybe light a candle or two. In the Middle Ages, they consulted the stars, priests, saints, and weather forecasts, because medieval conception was basically an occult ritual disguised as science. Welcome to the bizarre world of sacred breeding schedules, where getting pregnant took more planning than a royal coronation, and probably just as much incense. Here's how it worked. Before even thinking about having sex, wealthy medieval couples would consult astrologers to determine the ideal moment for conception. We're talking planetary alignments, moon phases, and even whether Venus was in a good mood that day. Medieval medical texts declared that the best time to conceive was when the moon was waxing, the woman's body was in hot, moist humoral balance, and the stars aligned favorably, literally. If that sounds insane, it's because it was. They also believed the direction your bed faced could influence the baby's soul. East toward the rising sun. Good. North toward the darkness. Don't even try. Want a boy? Tie off the left testicle before sex. Yes, that was an actual recommendation. Because they believed boys came from the right testicle and girls from the left. Anatomically absurd? Absolutely. But wildly popular nonetheless. Religious influence made it even more complicated. The church banned sex on Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, holy days, during Lent and Advent, during pregnancy, while breastfeeding, and, oh yes, during menstruation. Which left, maybe 3 days a month where sex wasn't considered sinful. Give or take a blood moon. To cope with this madness, rich couples hired professional conception consultants, part priest, part physician, part medieval fertility coach. These experts would review your medical history, birth charts, and local feast days to build a personalized sex schedule. Basically, your optimal window for royal seed deposition is between the feast of Saint Ursula and the next full moon, provided the wind blows east and Venus isn't pissed. And this wasn't just a noble trend. Even middle-class couples mimicked the rituals, just with fewer gemstones and more garlic. Some couples traveled hundreds of miles just to have sex in a church known for producing male heirs. Imagine explaining that to TSA. Medieval baby-making wasn't about biology. It was about control, superstition, and cosmic bureaucracy, and the pressure to get it right could be crushing. Because failure to produce an heir didn't just bring shame. It could lead to annulment, exile, or worse, political irrelevance. Chapter 5, The Girdle of Venus. If you think lingerie is just a modern invention designed for seduction, you haven't met the Girdle of Venus, the medieval version of sexy underwear meets spiritual armor, stitched with superstition, prayer, and just a sprinkle of panic. Because in the Middle Ages, underwear wasn't just about modesty or support, it was about magic, fertility, and divine approval. The Girdle of Venus was a real item, a belt, usually made of silk or linen, wrapped around the waist or hips and covered in religious inscriptions, astrological symbols, or straight-up magical incantations. Think of it as the medieval version of a chastity belt, designed to boost fertility, not suppress it. Women believed that wearing one could increase the chances of conception, ensure a safe childbirth, and yes, improve sexual pleasure. And they weren't cheap. The most elaborate girdles were stitched with gold thread, adorned with gemstones, and blessed by priests, which means yes, there was an entire side hustle for medieval clergy where they blessed magical underwear. But girdles were just the beginning. Women wore fertility amulets made from powdered unicorn horn, which was actually narwhal tusk, ground gemstones, crushed animal parts, biblical verses, and in some cases, snippets of hair from a saint's corpse. And it doesn't stop there. Some women inserted conception stones, polished crystals or rocks, into their underwear during sex, believing different stones could determine the child's gender. Emeralds for boys. Sapphires for girls. Diamonds for twins. It's like gender reveal parties, but inside your pants. Men had their own magical accessories, of course. Amulets tied around their thighs. Testicle-based charms, because testicles again, obviously. And even specially blessed loincloths intended to enhance stamina. Imagine going to a priest and asking him to bless your underpants for optimal thrusting power. This wasn't fringe behavior. We have Act 2. Actual surviving instruction manuals detailing how to wear the girdle, what prayers to recite, and what to do if it stops working. Answer: add more gemstones or try a different priest. And yes, some men refuse to sleep with women who weren't properly accessorized. Because in their minds, if the belt wasn't blessed, the sex wasn't sacred or safe. Even poor women got involved, crafting DIY girdles using scraps of cloth, local herbs, and pure desperation. Because in medieval society, a woman's worth was literally tied to her womb, and if she couldn't conceive, the blame was almost always on her. So next time you complain about tight jeans or uncomfortable shapewear, just be thankful you don't have to tie a rock to your uterus and chant to Saint Margaret before a date. Chapter 6, Public Impotence Trials. Think modern divorce is messy? Try proving your husband is sexually dysfunctional, in court, while a panel of judges, doctors, and nosy villagers take notes. Welcome to the public impotence trial, a medieval legal procedure that took oversharing to apocalyptic levels. In medieval Europe, divorce was almost impossible, unless you could prove your marriage hadn't been consummated. And what was the go-to accusation for that? Impotence. But here's the catch. You had to prove it. In public. With witnesses. And often, with a live demonstration. Let's walk through it. First, the couple would be physically examined by court-appointed physicians, a gentle euphemism for medieval genital inspectors. They'd poke, prod, and question you like you were applying for a job, except the job was proving whether or not you could get it up. If that wasn't humiliating enough, you could be subjected to the infamous trial by Congress. Yes, that's what they called it. It was not a polite conversation. It was court-mandated intercourse, supervised by legal officials. And yes, there were actual viewing chambers, sometimes with peepholes, sometimes with curtains, and sometimes with judges standing nearby like emotionally distant cheerleaders. The couple was given a specific time limit to perform. No arousal. No erection. Marriage annulled. Now, here's where it gets even more ridiculous. Some men, desperate to pass the test, tried to cheat, sneaking in aphrodisiacs made from crushed herbs, ground up animal parts, or potions blessed by sketchy traveling monks. Court officials literally had to frisk men for sex potions before trials. Imagine being caught smuggling bull testicle powder in your waistband. These trials could go on for weeks or even months, with repeat performances required. Some couples were made to try over and over again, like a reality show from hell. Welcome back to week 4 of Can He Get It Up? Women didn't get off easy either. To win the case, the wife had to prove she was sexually willing, physically capable, and that the problem wasn't her lack of appeal. This often involved her own set of intimate exams, questioning, and emotional humiliation. And the outcome? Even if the woman won, everyone would know. Because in small towns, news of your bedroom failures spread faster than the plague. People gossiped. Men were mocked. Women were shamed. It got so bad that some men voluntarily accepted annulment, just to avoid the courtroom performance. Admitting impotence became the lesser humiliation compared to letting the entire village critique your performance under pressure. Medieval society didn't just invade your privacy. It bulldozed it with legal paperwork and candlelight. Chapter 7, Brothel Business Empire. If you grew up thinking the medieval church was all about chastity, celibacy, and sin-free living, prepare to have your mind absolutely blown. Because for centuries, the very institution that condemned lust from the pulpit was also Europe's most successful pimp. That's right. The church didn't just tolerate prostitution, they monetized it. Welcome to the brothel business empire, where bishops collected rent, priests blessed buildings, and prostitutes paid taxes, to God's middlemen. Let's rewind to 12th century London. The district of Southwark, then called the Stews, was home to over 1,000 prostitutes, all legally operating in brothels. And who owned those brothels? The Bishop of Winchester. Yes, a man of the cloth, whose official title was Defender of Morality, also signed leases to whorehouses and pocketed the rent. But here's the twisted logic. Church leaders claimed that legalized, controlled prostitution prevented worse sins, like rape, adultery, or homosexuality. So they decided to regulate sex work like a business. And boy, did they go all in. Medieval brothels under church control had dress codes for prostitutes, work hour regulations, weekly medical inspections, and bans on operating during religious holidays. Because, Jesus might be watching extra closely on saints' feast days. Prostitutes were forbidden from refusing clients without cause, charging outside approved zones, or working too close to churches. Which is hilarious, considering the church literally owned their homes. The financial pyramid was genius in its hypocrisy. Prostitutes paid rent to brothel keepers. Keepers paid rent to church landlords. Church used that money to build monasteries and pay for religious festivals. Yes, your medieval chapel may have been funded by syntax from sex work. The profit margins were so good that some clergymen turned into landlords full-time, disguising their investments as moral oversight. And any reformer who tried to shut it down, they faced resistance from both religious and secular authorities, because too many people were getting rich off this holy hustle. It wasn't just England, either. Similar systems existed in France, Italy, Germany, wherever the church held land and power. The hypocrisy became so institutionalized that people just accepted it. Church by day, brothel by night, salvation upstairs, seduction downstairs. And that's not an exaggeration. Some convents doubled as brothels behind closed doors. Holy robes by day, loose laces by midnight. This double standard only collapsed during the Protestant Reformation, when religious leaders finally said, "Hey, maybe the church shouldn't be running a sex ring." But for hundreds of years, medieval Europe's most powerful spiritual leaders were also its most successful sex entrepreneurs. Heavenly hymns by morning, dirty money by night. Chapter 8, Medieval Contraception Madness. You might think that contraception in the Middle Ages was non-existent. Oh, it existed. It was just insane. Equal parts dangerous, disgusting, and completely useless. Welcome to the unhinged world of medieval birth control. Let's start with everyone's favorite theme. Animal testicles. Again. Women would wear pouches of weasel testicles around their necks, believing this would prevent pregnancy. Why? Because weasels were considered sexually active, but gave birth to small litters. So clearly, their testicles must have magical fertility controlling powers. But wait, that was just foreplay. Let's talk about concoctions. Medieval physicians brewed potions with ingredients like crushed beaver testicles, dried vulture tongues, mercury, yes, the actual poison, powdered iron, and wine. Because nothing says safe contraception like chugging a metal cocktail with a splash of beaver balls. And yes, some women died from these potions, which technically prevented pregnancy, but at an obvious cost. Congratulations. You're not pregnant. You're dead. Some methods got creative. There was the sneezing method, where women were instructed to sneeze violently right after sex in hopes of expelling the seed. Women carried pepper or snuff with them specifically for this purpose. Because clearly, that's how biology works. Then there were physical barriers, and I use the term loosely. Women inserted honey-soaked wool, crocodile dung, yep, imported from Egypt, and even half of a lemon, used as a makeshift cervical cap. Shockingly, the lemon idea wasn't totally ineffective. Citric acid does kill sperm. But, let's just say the comfort rating was about a -10. Magical contraception was its own category. Amulets. Spells. Charms containing dried frog parts. And rituals like walking backwards around a church 3 times while chanting a prayer to prevent pregnancy. Because apparently, God was cool with birth control. As long as you looked like an idiot doing it. Timing methods existed too, but were completely backward. Medieval doctors believed women were most fertile during menstruation and least fertile mid-cycle, the opposite of what's true. So couples trying to avoid pregnancy were actually maximizing their chances without realizing it. And what about the one method that does work, withdrawal? It existed. But physicians warned it could cause madness, blindness, seizures, and even death. Yes, they literally believed that not finishing inside a woman would poison the male body. So what do you get when you combine medical ignorance, religious guilt, and desperation? A contraception crisis powered by pepper, lemons, and lies. It's a miracle anyone survived. Chapter 9, The Medieval Sexual Paradox. So after all this, the testicle feasts, the magical underwear, the supervised sex acts, and the priest-run brothels, you might be wondering. What the hell was going on? How could a society so obsessed with chastity, modesty, and religious morality also be neck-deep in sexual chaos? Welcome to the medieval sexual paradox, where repression and obsession collided so violently, they created one of the strangest sexual cultures in human history. On one hand, the church preached, virginity is sacred. Lust is a deadly sin. And sex is only for reproduction within holy matrimony. But on the other hand, they blessed fertility belts, ran legal brothels, hosted public sex trials, and filled medical journals with recipes for aphrodisiacs made from goat balls and cinnamon. It wasn't just hypocrisy. It was institutionalized schizophrenia. The same society that punished fornication with public flogging also demanded that newlyweds have sex in front of witnesses. The same doctors who said sex was dangerous to the soul also handed out magical conception stones and lube recipes made from deer fat. They created a world where people feared their own bodies, but couldn't stop obsessing over them. Where women were told they were spiritually unclean during menstruation, but were also blamed for infertility, impotence, and even miscarriage. Where sex was treated as both a sacred duty and a shameful indulgence, depending entirely on who was watching. And that's the paradox. When you make something taboo, you don't kill desire, you supercharge it. You drive it underground, into rituals, myths, potions, punishments, and fetishes that grow more extreme the more they're suppressed. Medieval sexuality wasn't just bizarre. It was a mirror, reflecting just how far humans will go to navigate fear, pleasure, control, and faith, all tangled up in one sweaty, sanctified mess. So the next time someone calls it the Dark Ages, remember, they weren't dark because people didn't have sex. They were dark because of what people believed about sex. And that is the most shocking thing of all.